Dear students of class 10A and 10B, the first war of independence of 1857 was a great cause in the history of India. The British divided the two communities of India, the Hindus and the Muslims. Now, what was the reason the British did it? The British did it with a view to weaken relations between these two communities. Because during the first war of independence of 1857, the British noticed that the Muslims and the Hindus, by joining their hands, could organize a movement against them and could harm the British sentiments in India. That's why the unity between these two communities would become a threat to British rule in India. That's why they decided to follow the policy of divide and rule. The policy of divide and rule. In the first war of independence, the participation of the Muslims, the active participation of the Muslims with the Hindus gave a tough resistance. In the first war of independence, the Britishers had to crush the movement by means of spending huge amount of money. That's why the British earlier declared the Muslims to be their enemies. They openly declared that it was due to the Muslims' participation in the first war of independence. The war was fought between the British and the people of India. The Muslims were responsible for that, and they deprived the Muslims of their all rights. But after the rise of an eminent leader, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, the British in course of time changed their policy towards the Muslims and adopted the policy of appeasement. The British felt that the unity between these two communities in India might become a cause of threat to the British rule in India in the long run. That's why they decided to give some concessions to the Muslims and started misinterpreting the system of religion both for the two communities. Means they narrated the Muslim communal historians of Britain and communal historians of Turkey, and Muslim communal historians and British communal historians narrated the Hindu kings as the masters of the Muslims, and they also narrated the Muslim rulers of India as the invaders of India, foreigners of foreigners. For example, Babur, Akbar, Humayun, Shah Jahan, they all were declared foreigners. Although they came from Afghanistan and established their rule in India, but yet the communal historians of India, they described the Mughals as foreigners. Why? Because of making an image for the Muslims, making an image about the Muslims, that the Muslims were hated by the Hindus from the beginning to till death. The Muslims were hated since the Muslims had no majority in India. India was a Hindu majority country. That's a Hindu majority country. That's why the Hindu rulers had great hatred for the Muslims. That's why they compared the Muslims to be the invaders, and about the Hindu subjects, they also narrated the Muslim rulers that the Muslims perverted the Hindus' belief and faith, Hindu religious beliefs and faiths by destroying the Hindu temples. So, by means of uh, doing this act of misery, both for the two communities, the British were able to a stand, establish a wall between the two communities, the Hindus and the Muslims. And apart from this, the rise of an eminent leader, Muslim leader, Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan. Earlier, he was in favor of strengthening the unity between the two communities, but later on he changed his stand and narrated it that the interest of the Muslims was completely separate than the interest of the Hindus. That means the Muslims should protect their own rights, the Muslims should safeguard their own interest, but they must not be a part of the Hindu programs, since the interests of the Hindus were quite different than that of the interest of the Muslims. That's why, under the able guidance of Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan, it was for the first time the Muslims started receiving Western education. Earlier, the Muslims had no regard for Western education, but Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan realized it that receiving Western education would bring prosperity for the Muslims, and Muslim English educated people might have chance to be appointed in the British administration, and that's why they encourage the Muslim people, and Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan introduced Western education among the Muslims, and also encouraged the women to receive education. And Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan established a number of schools, colleges. Anglo-Oriental College at Aligarh, it was also constructed by Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan. He also established other colleges, but at the same time, he encouraged the Muslims. As a result of it, ultimately, the Muslim League was established. Ultimately, the Muslim League was established in India. The Muslim League, under the inspiration of Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan, the Muslim League was established. But when the Muslim League was established, Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan was no more. But the Muslim League was established under the able guidance and inspiration of Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan, because Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan inspired the Muslims that there should be a separate political organization for the Muslims. As soon as the Congress, Indian National Congress, was established in the year 1885 by A.O. Hume, Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan strongly protested it, and also added it that one separate political organization should be established by the Muslim community. But there was no. But during that time, the situation was not in favor of the Muslims. That's why, after the death of Sir Saeed Ahmed Khan in the year 1906, the Muslim League was established, and the Muslims demanded their rights separately before the British, and the British decided to give some concessions to the Muslims. And now, justification of the partition of Bengal. The partition of Bengal, which was implemented by Lord Curzon in the year 1905, the Muslims favored it because they thought that the Muslim majority East Bengal would become a part of the Muslim country. So the interest of the Muslims would be safeguarded, safeguarded, and it was their main aim to safeguard the interest of the Muslim people. That's why they supported the partition plan of Lord Curzon. And apart from this, Lord Curzon, Lord Curzon's view was not only to it was not the partition plan was adopted by Lord Curzon not only to serve the administrative purpose of the British, but also to weaken the unity between the two communities, the Hindus and Muslims. It was the main aim, main intention of Lord Curzon to weaken the unity between the Hindus and Muslims. That's why the partition plan, the partition plan was adopted and implemented. But the people of India, they strongly protested against the partition plan and organized movements against the partition plan. And what happened to it? In the year 1911, the partition plan was annulled. And when the partition plan was withdrawn, before the partition plan was withdrawn, Lord Curzon got back to his own place, England, and in place of him, another one came as Governor General of India. Anyway, now role of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. This basic point I have already made. This point already I have explained you the role of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. The last point, misinterpretation of history. Misinterpretation of history. Our country's history, Indian history. India was a country where many rulers came to rule our country. It was under the Muslims during medieval period. The Muslims established their rule, and before that the Hindu rulers also ruled our country, and most of them they ruled. Some of them were tolerant rulers, some of them were not tolerant. Some of the Muslim rulers, they destroyed Hindu temples and constructed a number of mosques, and some of the Muslim rulers they did not follow that system, but they were tolerant rulers, and they strengthened the unity between the two communities, the unity, brotherhood between the two communities, like Akbar the Great, who established an impression as a tolerant ruler during the reign of the Muslim. During the reign of the Muslim period, the one ruler, Akbar, became a prominent ruler. Under his rule, the country's image reached far and wide, and he ruled for about 49 years. But the thing is, the misinterpretation, some communal historians like the British, like the Indian communal historians, they portrayed the kings of India like Rana Pratap, like Shivaji, as national heroes, and Akbar and Aurangzeb as foreigners. Although Akbar, Aurangzeb, they belong to a foreign dynasty, a foreign country, Afghanistan. Babur came from Afghanistan and established Mughal dynasty in India by defeating the last Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, and then the Mughal rule continued by the successors of Babur, one after one. But the Indian communal historians portrayed Akbar and Aurangzeb as foreigners. They were foreigners and effused communal feelings between the Hindus and the Muslims. At the same time, the other communal British historians narrated that the Muslims, Afghans and Mughals was called the Muslim. They were actually, the Muslim rulers were dubbed as foreign invaders. The Muslim rulers were dubbed as foreign invaders who had settled in India, who came from Afghanistan and settled in India. And so, At the same time, the British historians, the British communal historians ignored the notion of a composite culture in India and tried to create a rift between the two communities, the Hindus and Muslims. And they failed to interpret that the diversity was primarily class-wise and nation-wise, region-wise, not religion-wise. And some communal historians highlighted that the Indian society and culture had reached great heights during the ancient period, but was declining due to medieval period, which was dominated by only the Mughal rulers. They did not give much importance to the contribution of the medieval period to the development of Indian community, Indian religion, Indian art, literature, culture and society, but they misinterpreted it because so many Muslim Mughal rulers, especially from the time of Akbar till the time of Shah Jahan, the Muslims, the Mughals tried to glorify the image, not only the image of the Muslims, but also the image of the Hindus, because basically they are tolerant rulers. They realized that India was a large country having Hindu majority, so this country should be treated impartially. So except Aurangzeb, all other Mughal rulers, they realized it, and they ruled successfully. They established law and order strongly, but the communal bias was propagated. The communal bias was propagated. Why? Because of some writers, some poets who narrated it through their poetry, their dramas, their novels, their short stories, newspaper, etc., etc. And that's why, during this period, the British easily adopted the policy of divide and rule. The policy of divide and rule weakened the unity between the two communities, but it was short-living. After a few years later, both the two communities came closer. They realized that the unity between the two communities would bring a rule under them, a rule which was ruled by the British must be ended. That's why the unity between the two communities and organization and an organizing movement against the British was very important. Both the two communities, they felt it, and later on they joined hands collectively in order to overthrow the rule of the British in India. Up to this, my dear students, thank you. Few points left. Next day I shall complete it.